So I've decided to do a video on the potential return of Nick Diaz. Now I say potential because, like most things concerning either Diaz brother, it's important not to get too excited. Not because I think anyone is lying per se, but after following both Nick and Nate for years now, rash decisions and sudden U-turns are not uncommon when it comes to their relationship with the UFC. First things first, I'll come clean and say that this story has an added level of importance to me, due to the fact that Nick Diaz is probably my all-time favourite fighter. A lot of people write Nick off due to the fact that he re-entered the UFC and came out of it with a 1-3 record, losing to Carlos Condit, George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva while managing only to beat BJ Penn. And sure, if you want to narrow down this man's achievements to being offensively stifled on his way to 3 decision defeats against 3 very cautious and calculated opponents, then by all means do. But when I think of Nick Diaz, I think of his wars with Paul Daly, Takanori Gomi and KJ Noons. I think of his dissection of Marius Zaromskis, his intimidation of Robbie Lawler, his relentlessness against Evangelista Santos. The man in his prime was a force of nature. On that 12-1 run he achieved after leaving the UFC for the first time, Diaz elevated himself into the numbers of the welterweight elite and began to really hone a fighting style that was uniquely his own. I cannot think of another fighter who conveys as much of their personality inside the cage as Nick Diaz did. The guys who beat him, Carlos Condit, George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, did so by nullifying him, either in the grappling department in the case of GSP, or by outmaneuvering him and avoiding head-on confrontation. He might not have been the greatest welterweight of his era, but there is no doubt in my mind that he wasn't far off. He of course favoured a volume-based approach, but when he did start to sit down on his shots in those moments that he smelt blood, you could notice everything getting sharper, more powerful. For my money, he had one of the best body punches in the sport's history, effectively using it in the middle of combinations to keep his opponents guessing. Again, I'm not saying he could have beaten George St. Pierre. I'm not even saying that he should have been handed the decision against Carlos Condit, even though he potentially should have been. But all in all, Nick was a special fighter. However, what gripped me above all other things was his personality outside the cage. This was a very vulnerable young man who did not seem to see the merit in being anything other than himself at all times. A lot of people might have been turned off by the mean mug, the constant F-bombs and insults, the general lack of stability to his public demeanour. But what I saw was an incredibly honest person, who even within the context of celebrity culture in its entirety, could do nothing but be completely true to himself at all times. There were no games being played in a Nick Diaz interview. If he was on, then he was on. But if he didn't want to be there, if he was incensed by something you said, the walls would go up, and the nervousness would be visible on his face. It was like night and day. 5 years have passed since Diaz last made the walk, and by the looks of things, Nick is finally sitting back and enjoying the life he has carved out for himself through his battles in the cage. He now has business ventures to keep himself afloat, and all in all, he seems to be out there living like a man who no longer has any commitment to the fight game. He's partying, he's living large, and even though I would have loved to watch him attempt to re-establish a standing within the sport of mixed martial arts, given what I know about Nick and his relationship with fighting, I can't help but be happy for him. So when I watched his ESPN interview with Ariel Helwani in November of last year, I was as confused as anyone else. Truth be told, he didn't seem like he was in a good place. People aired their concerns about his speech and his meandering thoughts, and to be honest, I was with them for the most part. But at the same time, I was aware of who it was that we were watching. Nick simply doesn't have that switch that can allow him to turn on his bravado-tinged alter ego like a lot of fighters can. He never had that. When you interview Nick Diaz, you're getting the man in whatever state of mind he wakes up in that morning. No filter, no bullshit. And while I can't say anything for sure, I was aware of the fact that this was Nick's first major interview in years. A 45-minute sit-down with the sport's most famous journalist, live on ESPN, one of the world's premier sporting networks. Let me be clear here, I'm not trying to claim anything about the exact cause of Nick's odd demeanour in this interview, but to disregard the inherent anxiety that would come about from a situation like this would be foolish. This is Nick Diaz we're dealing with after all. But yeah, I didn't want to see him fight. I thought his career had reached a point worth being proud of, and after such a lengthy hiatus, his status as a legend of the game had already been set in stone for me. However, we have now received word that Diaz is very much set on making his return to the octagon in early 2021. An announcement that came alongside a short video showing an in-shape Nick pacing in front of a camera. My immediate reaction was that he looks good physically. Apart from that, what else can I really say? It was a short video, but all in all, the fact that he looks in good shape was promising. Look, it's not my place to tell another man what to do with his life. Indeed, he is 37 years old, but his game has never been built around his speed, and if he can find a way to reach a level of performance and endurance that will allow him to do justice to the fighter he once was, I will buy the pay-per-view, I'll buy the t-shirt, whatever. For now though, I'll have to measure my excitement, both because of Nick's history with making U-turns on decisions, and also due to the fact that I want to hear him speak about it to understand the why. Because it doesn't really make sense to me at this point in time. I'm not closing the door to it, and to be honest, if he was set up to make his return against a fighter who wasn't an active member of the divisional top 15, I would be a lot warmer to the notion of seeing Nick Diaz make the walk again. In his prime, Diaz would be a handful for anyone in the top 10, especially if they favoured a striking heavy approach. But if we're actually talking about a return to the octagon, why not give him someone he has history with, like Carlos Condit, Diego Sanchez, or even Anderson Silva? Whether Nick is committed to making a run at the title or a long stay in the sport remains to be seen, but if you know anything about his biggest attribute, his ungodly cardio, you will know that a return to mixed martial arts for him means a return to a ridiculous conditioning program. I don't know if Nick has shared his brother Nate's commitment to their intense workouts over the last 5 years, but in his prime, that seemingly endless gas tank came as a result of Nick's insane work ethic. That work ethic is the standard by which his career's worth of preparation should be judged. That cardio didn't just come out of nowhere. So I suppose my main question comes down to how dedicated Nick is to the type of work that his fighting style requires. We all know how Nick Diaz fights often go. He gets hit, he gets dropped, he recovers, he turns up the pace, he drowns his opponent. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and his fighting style requires the specific attributes that stood as the defining features of his prime years. If he's coming back, he's going to need those attributes, and for me, as much as I like the idea of seeing my favourite fighter return, I know what a return will require of him in order to be successful. Perhaps Nick Diaz learned something about himself during the lockdown, in a time where he could not properly reap the benefits of the fruits of his labour. Maybe a spark was ignited in him to return to the thing he does best. I'm honestly not sure, and I fully understand the dangers that come with attempting to make a dive into one of the UFC's most stacked divisions. So I'll wait and see. I'm not sold yet, but I'm certainly interested and excited for the future. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. And as always, thank you for watching.